Hello and welcome to yet another edition of Soft Cover, an online platform where we launch select non-fiction books. I am Bhadra, Sinha, Associate Editor with ThePrint, and in today's episode, we have with us two legal scholars turned authors, Mohammad Nasir and Samreen Ahmed. Both are associate with the premier institution, that is the Aligarh Muslim University. Nasir is an assistant professor in the Department of Law there, and Ahmed is a legal researcher. They have joined us today to talk about their book, Syed Mahmood, Colonial India's Dissenting Judge, which is a Bloomsbury publication. Before we discuss about the book with both of you, I would first unveil it for our viewers. Just a second. I have it here back with me. Syed Mahmood, Colonial India's Dissenting Judge. It's written by Mohammad Nasir Samreen Ahmed, and it's a Bloomsbury publication. Well, I welcome both of you to this edition of Soft Cover, and I congratulate both of you for writing this book on such an exceptional, towering personality. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess this is your first book, Mr. Nasir and Ahmed, and Mr. Ahmed, and I must compliment both of you for choosing a personality like Syed Mahmood. And you know, as you describe in this book, Syed Mahmood was colonial India's dissenting judge, the first Indian to be elevated as a judge of the Allahabad High Court, someone who left an Eastern mark on the Western world. So my first question to you is that what really made you choose Syed Mahmood for your first book? Was it his contribution to the emerging Indian statutory laws, or was it his role as an academician or someone who always, you know, stood up to civil and human rights and liberties and personal liberties? So what really motivated you to write this book on him?
So first of all, I would like to thank you, Bhadra, and the print team for having us over. It is as much an honor as it is a pleasure to be discussing our first venture, Syed Mahmood, Colonial India Dissenting Judge. And just to take up your question as to what was the impetus and what prompted us to write this book is, so if we, in the arc of India's legal as well as judicial history, the protagonist of our book, Syed Mahmood, comes across as a man of many firsts. And as you've pointed out, that he was the first Indian judge of the Allahabad High Court, and also the only Indian judge on the Allahabad High Court which was dominated by British judges at the time. Secondly, he was also the first Indian Muslim to be appointed as a High Court judge anywhere in India. And how he was appointed is a very interesting story, because after the 1857 revolt, the Britishers undertook a very large-scale reforms of the legal system. And in order to legitimize their reforms in the eyes of the general public, they started co-opting local elites as a part of the reformed legal structure. And so Syed Mahmood, as you said, he left an Eastern mark on the Western world. He had the benefit of the both worlds because his education was in England, the higher legal education that he had. And so therefore, because his father was the architect of the Aligarh Muslim University, and he was also greatly involved in that. So they had an association with the Britishers, and therefore they deemed them to be friendly allies. And so Justice Syed Mahmood, he fitted the description that the Britishers were looking for to co-opt local elites within the reformed legal structure. So this is a very interesting story as to how he got elevated. The third first of Syed Mahmood is that he was also the first North Indian to be appointed as a High Court judge in India. And fourthly, and most importantly, is that he is the youngest ever High Court judge in India who was elevated at the age of 32 years. And this is a feat that stands unparalleled in the annals of India's legal history. The second to him is only the much famed and celebrated Chief Justice Hidayatullah, who became a High Court judge at the age of 41 years.
Yeah.
And so why I was emphasizing so much on a High Court judge is because at that point of time, it was the highest position a native could hold in the British government of India. Apart from that, another first to his credit is that he was also the first non-European member of the Allahabad Bar. It was not only in judiciary that he had made his mark. In fact, in the bar also, he had a first to his credit. And therefore, because by his very description of his firsts, he comes across as somebody who's an elite.
That's right. Yeah.
And so I noticed that academic as well as legal scholarship and popular writings on him were very sparse as well as scant.
Yeah.
So, as I have mentioned it in our book, that it came as a rather surprise for us that there is no biography of Justice Syed Mahmood in English. There is one booklet in Urdu, which is running into 56 pages, which contains factual information on him. And the PhD thesis, which is a very scholarly work, which was undertaken by Mr. Alan Gunther in the McGill University, which deals with how the Muslim law had undergone transformation during the British era by taking Syed Mahmood's contribution as a reference point. And so, apart from this, I mean, this is the description of Syed Mahmood as to what attracted us in the first place. Apart from that, as you know that a couple of years back, our university has undergone its centenary, 100 years.
Yeah.
And at the centenary celebrations of the Aligarh Muslim University, where the Prime Minister Narendra Modi was the chief guest, he also exhorted upon the AMU community to undertake research and study on the unknown national heroes of India, unknown or the lesser known national heroes of India. And so from the profile of Justice Syed Mahmood, it certainly appealed to us that he aptly fits the description of an unsung hero of pre-independent India. And apart from that, as Justice Syed Mahmood is primarily known as a man of law and for his judicial exploits. Seldom do we discuss his contributions in other domains of knowledge. And therefore, people generally tend to speak in very muted voices that he was an educationist, in the sense that his role in the making of the Aligarh Muslim University was very preeminent. However, since he was essentially assisting his father throughout, his role has been very shadowed and has been, in popular writings, has been hyphenated with that of his father. Whereas in real sense, his father's own achievements as an educationist and a social reformer would not have been possible had Syed Mahmood not been with him. The principal reason for the same is that Sir Syed was not very proficient in English. So all his writings and readings and translations in English were essentially done by Justice Syed Mahmood. And so therefore we thought that in order to do justice to the legacy of Justice Syed Mahmood, we have to dehyphenate the role that he had in the making of the Aligarh Muslim University with that of his father, so that his contribution can be read and recognized in his own right. And very less people know that at the age of only 26, he had drawn up a very comprehensive scheme for the modeling of the MAO college, which contained very minute details from how the hostels would be made, how the faculties would be recruited, how the admission has to be done. This was a scheme that was made by Syed Mahmood at the age of 26 years. And lastly, some of my own personal experiences as a student of law. So when I was a student of law, I had the forwarder of the book, who has 3 days back been elevated as a judge of the.
In fact, my next question was going to be that only, the contribution of Justice Dhulia who was,
Yes.
of course, the Uttarakhand Chief Justice and now is a judge of the Supreme Court. How much is his contribution in inspiring you to write a book? Because you've mentioned it briefly in your introduction also about your interactions with Justice Dhulia regarding Syed Mahmood ji.
So his contribution is very immense, and his impact on what his views were on Justice Mahmood judicial scholarship had a profound impact and an impression on me. So while I was a student of BLLB honors, I came in contact with him, and he asked me to do some research and bring to him some literature related to Justice Syed Mahmood. And so since then, I had been engaged in collecting a lot of literature on Justice Syed Mahmood, and I used to give it to him, time after time, because the literature on Mahmood had not been digitized.
Yeah.
Not been made available on the wonder that we call as the internet and Google. So there were limited publications of documenting his role, his contribution, his letters, so on and so forth, which were nonetheless available in the library at the Aligarh Muslim University. So I had compiled it over the years and given it to him. And as I put it now, very wisely, kept a copy of all those for myself.
Oh, yeah, yes.
Though all those, they came in handy.
In fact, I must admit, when I was reading the chapter about Justice Syed Mahmood's stint as a judge, and in that, the conversations and the communication between him and the Chief Justice, I was really intrigued to know that how did you lay your hands in those internal communications, those letters? Because I don't think these documents were ever made public at that time, or were they public? I'm not too sure about it. But I was, as a reporter, as a journalist, I really got intrigued, because as somebody who's been covering and writing on courts and talking about legal proceedings, we are always looking for these kind of documents, but we never get to lay our hands. So I'm sure it must have been a pretty tedious task for both of you.
Yes. And how I got my hands on the documents and how we got our hands on the documents, I request you to keep it as a state secret.
Achha, okay. Let it be as a state secret then.
It was a tedious task to actually find these documents, this designation letter and these things. It's all archival material considering the fact he died in the year 1903. So finding material on Mahmood was actually the most challenging task of writing this book. So the Aligarh Muslim University's library has a specific section which is dedicated to his father, Sir Syed. Then you have these gazettes, which was started in 1866, a periodical by Sir Syed Ahmed Khan himself. So since then, the university has been documenting whatever has been in the university. That was very much helpful for us while we were writing this book.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, Mr. Nasir, my next question is for you. I just want to know, there have been many dissenting judges in the post-colonial era of our country. So why is that Justice Syed Mahmood should be treated differently, and why did you feel the need to tell his story? Partially, you have, of course, explained to me while responding to my first question, but if you could just elaborate a little bit on why Justice Syed Mahmood should be treated differently.
Yes. So I think before we can actually venture to index and chronicle his contribution to the Indian legal system and the development of the law, it's important to situate his enduring value in the historical context of the Indian legal system.
Mm-hmm.
And his enduring value is that he is the first judge known to espouse the cause of judicial independence in the way that we understand it today.
Yeah.
And I emphasize on the word, the way we understand it today, I mean post-independence, when we are governed in a constitutional democracy.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so we have to realize that standing up for judicial independence in the colonial era was a whole of a different game than it is in a constitutional democracy, where you have a judicially and constitutionally enshrined concept of judicial independence. And so the vantage point for reading, for looking, for analyzing Justice Syed Mahmood is that the role of law in advancing justice. So here we actually hyphenate the role of law in advancing justice was different during colonial days than it is understood as now.
Yeah.
Because visualization of law as a tool for advancing justice is something that comes very naturally to us now, but did not come very naturally to us during the colonial times. And therefore, law without justice during colonial times and law enmeshed with justice during the present times, the link between the two has to be found in the integrity of fearless Indian judges who, during the colonial era, for justice while administering the law, and therefore they gave us the framework of an independent judiciary for a for the post-independent India. And so this is, I think, the essential vantage point for looking at Justice Syed Mahmood. Be that as it may, however, just like the majority of things, the most remarkable form of change goes unnoticed when its embers are first lit. Back in the 19th century, Mahmood became the first judge to resist colonial power by being in a colonial institution and espousing the cause of judicial independence, as I said. It was a change that colonial India needed then, a change in the mindset, but whose value may not have been realized then, but surely needs to be looked up upon now.
Yeah. In fact, I was just trying to, locate that particular portion where you've spoken about how he interpreted the word hearing. At a time, as you said, there was no constitution, but the way he interpreted the word hearing to actually ensure personal liberty and civil liberty. So, I mean, I think it is in the chapter on landmark judgments where you have elaborated on this particular judgment. But let's take our conversation forward. So, of course, your book speaks quite extensively about Justice Syed Mahmood's stint as a judge of the Allahabad High Court and then his resignation. It gives us an insight into, as I stated earlier, into the internal communications between him and his Chief Justice. And I'm sure you have access to more than what is really published, But you have pointed out that it was basically his dissenting views which led to the serious differences between him and his Chief Justice. But somewhere you also say that we cannot disregard Justice Syed Mahmood's intemperate behavior. So, of course, since you have gone through the entire research material, personally, if you analyze it, what do you think would have gone wrong at that point of time? Or, what exactly went wrong that provoked the Chief Justice to give such a strong public opinion about Justice Syed Mahmood? If you could just, I know you may not like to go delve deeper into it, but if you could just speak a little bit or a few lines just to, highlight that incident in his life.
See, of course, the remonstrance and the counter-remonstrance that took place between Justice Syed Mahmood and his Chief Justice is a matter of record which has been carried in the book. And as you suggested, there is no point in going into the facts and the details. I think we have to see this conflict at the time at which it took place in the last quarter of the 19th century, where subservience by a native judge to a British Chief Justice, one, and secondly, where judiciary was also considered subservient to the political and the executive arm. This was considered to be the natural order of things. And therefore, Justice Syed Mahmood, as he was ingrained by the virtues of independent thinking, free inquiry, as well as judicial integrity, this is something that never came naturally to him. And so his differences with Chief Justice Edge can be broadly categorized under two heads. Firstly, it related to the administrative functioning of the court, which the Chief Justice considered to be his exclusive domain. And the other was his actually dissenting opinions. So while the initial differences and intolerance of the British Chief Justice related to Syed Mahmood's dissenting opinions on human rights. They conflagrated later on the administrative functioning of the court, which we have explained in great detail.
Yeah.
And I think where Mahmood appeared to have foundered is perhaps where he took his differences to an all new level and exhibited an element of outrage in his retorts, angry retorts to the Chief Justice, and his actually contemplating the criminal as well as civil remedies against the Chief Justice was something that was not taken lightly by the higher authorities in the colonial era, and therefore situations were manufactured in a way that Mahmood was not given the latitude to function as a judge in his own right, and situations they came up in which he eventually had to resign, rather than, as I quote, being dependent upon the frowns and smileys of a British Chief Justice. The fact that he chose to let go of his position as a High Court judge, but did not let go of his honor as well as his country's honor, is something that will forever remain enshrined in the annals of India's legal as well as judicial history, and will serve as a source of inspiration to all of us.
So this actually I was very curious after I read this particular chapter to know, and I thought, and I think that you'll be able to answer me. Do you think at any point of time Justice Mahmood regretted accepting the position as a judge after so much happened during his tenure as a High Court judge?
No, I think from whatever record has been made available to us and from whatever we've gone through, and we've gone through a lot.
Yeah. That's that is why I wanted to ask you this question, because I couldn't see it anywhere in the book.
Yeah, so actually, as soon as he had resigned, so he had a position to take up at the Aligarh Muslim University, because although law was his profession, education was his passion.
Yeah.
And so at some point of time, when he took up the job as a judge, there was also a hesitation in his mind that, there could be a life outside of law also. So he eventually took up law because he also needed a sabbatical, and he wanted to dissociate himself from his father, and wanted to be recognized as somebody in his own right and on his own merit. Because of course, as a man of education, he's always seen as second to his father.
Yeah.
So, but after he relinquished his position, after he resigned as a judge, he took up a position at the Aligarh Muslim University. He also started his practice for a brief period, and he was also served as a legislator in the Viceroy's Council. So he never regretted leaving the job of a judge, and also that a pension was fixed for him.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. So let's move on to another interesting chapter in your book, which is the landmark judgments, where you have extensively explored Justice Muhammad's path-breaking verdicts, particularly in the area of Muslim personal law. And and most of his judgments have also been acknowledged by the Supreme Court in its recent verdicts. But what really fascinated me was his knowledge on Hindu law. It was equally formidable. So can you reflect a bit on his contribution, which I feel must have been made in the formulation of Hindu personal law, especially in the context of women's rights? And what I really felt another interesting aspect is about, his knowledge on Shastras, because he used to quote directly from the Shastras in his judgment, especially when it came to Hindu personal laws.
Yes. You absolutely point out the correct fact that his knowledge of Sanskrit and the perusal of the original text of Hindu laws comes as a surprise to all of us, considering that he's very well known for his judgments in Muslim law, his scholarship in Muslim law. His decisions, as we have quoted in the book, have been found to be very empowering in reference to women. He comes out as a crusader of women, specifically the destitute women and the widows. So if you look at his judgment in the case of Binda versus Consilia, that he has evolved a new ground for refusing the plea of cohabitation, that is the for restitution of conjugal rights. So wherein the husband was guilty of subjecting his wife to cruelty, he said that is a sufficient ground for refusing the husband the remedy for cohabitation and restitution of conjugal rights. That was later on incorporated in the Hindu Marriage Act of 1955.
Yeah.
Similarly, if you look at his judgment in the case of Janki versus Nandaram, you find that he is very concerned about the financial security of women, specifically a widow. So he evolved a new ground for the extending maintenance to a widow of a predeceased Hindu son. Earlier, the predeceased Hindu son's widow was not given any share in the property or was not entitled to maintenance from her in-laws. So Justice Mahmood in this case extended a new ground. He said that the the brother of a predeceased son was liable to pay maintenance to the widow of his brother in case if he has inherited the property of his father, which was self-acquired.
In fact, this one particular paragraph, which I really found very interesting, is on page 140, where you have mentioned how Justice Mahmood actually pointed out the inaccuracies in the translation of Mandalik in a particular matter, and that was only because of his profound knowledge of Sanskrit and the fact that he also examined the original text from one of, from a very old Hindu scripture. So I guess his, his overall personality was quite a multifaceted personality. That's what I can feel, and that's what I come across, when it came to kind of understanding him or his personality. But my next question continues to be on him only. For both of you, how would you like to remember Justice Syed Muhammad? Would you like to remember for his immense contribution in the field of law, or as an academician, because his work after he gave up his career in judiciary was more towards, the field of education?
So I think Justice Syed Mahmood's overarching contribution does remain in the field of law, although that in no way belittles or derogates away from his contribution in other fields. But the reason why we need to accentuate on his contribution in law is because I remember there is the former Supreme Court Chief Justice, Justice J.S. Verma.
Yeah.
He actually wrote about Justice Syed Mahmood that in common parlance, we understand the concept of judicial activism as something of a recent phenomenon. During the 1980s and during the 1990s, the concept of public interest litigation, as it started to gain roots in the Indian legal system, Justice J.S. Verma has actually credited Justice Syed Mahmood for sowing the seeds of judicial activism.
Okay.
And so he says that the judicial activism first originated in India from the dissenting judgments of Justice Syed Mahmood, and that he was somebody who was far ahead of his times, in the sense that his judgments, which were in the minority then, after independence, many of his judgments, of course not all, were recognized by the Supreme Court and the other high courts as laying down the correct position of law. And Justice Rohinton Nariman, the recently retired judge of the Supreme Court of India, has authored a 2-volume book, which is titled Discordant Notes, which chronicles the great dissents of all Supreme Court judges of India since the court was established. Notwithstanding that the book is limited to Supreme Court judges, he actually begins by saying that the story of India's great dissenters cannot be told until and unless Justice Syed Mahmood's contribution is invoked. And so this is a great tribute to Justice Syed Mahmood, that for somebody who relinquished office in 1893 is now remembered by the present Supreme Court, not only in judgments, but what is written by the judges outside of judgments, which is an indication that recent judges also look upon Syed Mahmood as a source of inspiration for them.
My next question is, it's regarding dissenting verdicts. So these verdicts, these opinions are usually seen as progressive, ahead of times, judgments that become acceptable much later in time. How do you both evaluate such verdicts, in the sense the role played by these opinions in shaping up our country's jurisprudence?
So for the bell, because we may have many laymen also who might be watching this.
Yeah.
So just to put it for them, a dissenting judgment is ordinarily understood is a judgment of a judge who, sitting as part of a larger bench, dissents with the majority. And so the reference point for us, while we have evaluated Justice Syed Mahmood's dissenting judgment, has been the discussion which has been made by Justice Rohinton Nariman in his 2-volume book, in which he has concluded in a chapter which is titled The Need for Dissent, that for a legal system, the benefits of dissenting opinion far outweigh the disadvantages of dissenting opinions. And so, looking at Syed Mahmood's dissenting judgments, even if not Syed Mahmood dissenting judgments, the value of dissenting judgments per se and how they can contribute to the growth and evolution of our legal system. The first is that the dissenting judgments, they exemplify judicial integrity through dissent. And Mahmood, as we've shown in our book, represents one of the earliest examples of this. From a judge's individual point of view, they exemplify judicial integrity. That is number one. The number two is that dissenting judgments are very important tools in the development of law, in the sense that they leave enough room for future developments in law. And a dissenting judge, by pointing out flaws in the majority opinion, so he's a part of the minority opinion, a dissenting judge, he proposes a remedial that may be applied in the times to come.
Right.
And so therefore, these dissenting opinions serve as a kind of a safety valve for courts to internalize error prevention.
Yes.
So I'm reminded of the quote by the great Justice H.R. Khanna in ADM Jabalpur case, where he said that my dissenting judge is an appeal to the brooding spirit of the law, to the intelligence of a future day, when a later decision may possibly correct the error into which the dissenting judge believes the court to have been betrayed.
Yeah.
And so the Justice Syed Mahmood's most famous dissents are actually related to questions of human rights. And so therefore, he has shown the possibility that majority opinions can have a very deleterious impact on individual liberty as well as the society as a whole. And so the dissenting judgments, they, insofar as espouse the principles of natural justice, they make an effort to fill in justice into the law where there is no direct law on that particular point. So therefore, they fill in the gaps.
In fact, I think Justice Mahmood's dissenting opinions have more or less now become the rule of law for our country. If I mean, you may correct it if I'm wrong. So at the end, this question is for both of you in just few lines. If you could just tell me, your personal views, each one of you, that how would you define Justice Muhammad's personality? Just few quick lines, because for me, he's a very fascinating personality, starting as a as a judge, then moving on to becoming an academician, and even as a judge, the kind of role he played. So I think he comes across as a very strong and a towering personality for me. But for both of you, how would you define him?
I would define him as a flawed genius.
Okay, that's good. And what about you, Samreen?
So a genius whose life was as triumphant as tragic.
Okay, and why do you call it tragic? Just
He had to resign from the High Court judgeship. His personal life, as we have discussed in the book, had a lot of discordant with his marital relations were marred by a lot of his relationships with his father. I mean, all of them were affected because of some of his habits or because these sedentary habits.
But I think the crucial point is that despite all these personal mishappenings in his life, his contribution to the society and to the field of law has been immense. So, well, I'm afraid that I would have to end our conversation here. I thank both of you for joining us today and sharing your views about your book. And I once again congratulate you. And I really, really admire the research work that you've undertaken for writing this book. Thank you once again. Thanks a lot.